the central focus that I've taken is the paradox of change, because I believe that is really what distinguishes Gestalt from many of the other psychotherapeutic modalities, is that the change occurs when you become who you are. And that's run as a theme throughout my book. How do we become aware and accept who we are? And in that process, the change occurs. We don't have to make effort to change. We don't have to try to change. So the notion then of the fertile void fits so well with that, is how do we allow that emptiness, believe in the fact that the void, the space that we have in front of us, has a richness and a vitality and a potential that we can step into. Gestalt has such a wonderful, optimistic, positive perspective in that sense, because we believe if we trust the process, that by staying with the process, that emergent space that we are stepping into will have a positive richness for us. Of course, that's very difficult to believe in whenever you're going through an incredibly painful, traumatic, or a very difficult time, struggling with colleagues, friends, partners, where you cannot see that the way forward is anything but destructive.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, then Gestalt says, well, let us hold this space. And if we can hold that and be aware of it, we can actually transform it. But not easy.
Not easy. But when you apply this knowledge to the executive coaching field, then you can give an extra, not everyday support to your client, right? Who is a leader and would like to be a better leader and would like to be more present. Then what Gestalt gives as a method can really be a wonderful tool in your hand. And that's your professionalism, as I say.
Yes. Well, the way I work is combining a solution-focused cognitive behavioral approach, because organizations and businesses need to have a strategy and a plan of where they're going. They have to have a future focus. The risk in most organizations and with most leaders is they get caught up with the doing, the striving for the outcome, and they lose the current reality. They lose their emotional experience of where they are now. Mm-hmm. And where their journey is taking them. And I have a saying that I use that came from a Christian community in the US. Work as though you live 100 years, live as if you'll die tomorrow.
Oh.
So you have that wonderful combination of having, you've got years and years and years ahead of you, and whatever you're doing, you're thinking about the future, which is what organizations, I've run the Gestalt Center in London, I run the Academy of Executive Coaching, and we set plans for the future. But the other challenge is, how do we then live in the moment as if there is no tomorrow? And that sort of wonderful contradiction, as it seems, of moving forward but still being present. So that's the real challenge. And my book attempts to put the Gestalt perspective of living as if you'll die tomorrow in that context of having to be aware of a future and a context and a world around us.
Yeah, so the focus is on the individual who is the leader and who just is able to stay in the here and now, and then the the change occurs, and that's it. So easy to speak about it and so difficult to live with it, right?
Yes, but not just leaders, teams. So I work now a lot, and I've written now a book on systemic team coaching, because when I work with teams, it's the same. I get them to experience where they are now. How do they accept each other in the moment? How do they accept themselves where they are? In fact, it becomes even more profound because you've got 6, 8, 10 people all rushing forward, trying to do so many things that they lose the connection. So the other wonderful part about Gestalt, working with teams, is about how to help people to connect in the moment when they're in the room. And that's very, very powerful. Because the team, the individuals need to connect, to work together, to connect and withdraw, because of course they're only in meeting together for a short time. They have to withdraw and then reconnect again. So all of those elements are very important, and the concept of the fertile void is quite alien, of course, in organizations. So I usually introduce it in some form, very, very lightly, and usually talk about emergent processes, and not rushing ahead, and being present with where we are and enjoying and valuing the richness.
Sounds wonderful. John, at this point, I would like to ask you if you would emphasize for me or for us a little bit how Gestalt coaching and therapy is different, because it's always a very sophisticated point of the work.
Indeed, indeed. Well, having been a Gestalt therapist for half of my career, and now working in organizations for the other half, I'm fairly well positioned to talk, from both sides. So fundamentally, therapy is, and actually I understand, means healing. We are trying to get a resolution to the painful experiences in our past. So the traumas, the painful, especially childhood relationships. And if we can find a resolution to those in the past, or that are in the present, but created in the past, then we make an easier transition, or we make an easier move into the present and the future. Well, coaching doesn't have the time, doesn't have the focus, doesn't have the quality of relationship that allows for that depth of exploration. So in a strange way, this is where Gestalt works quite well, because it's about taking that history that is there, that legacy that sits with us, and saying, so if you've got that, how can we use it to move forward? How can you learn from that terrible experience that we can't resolve because we don't have the time or the relationship? How can we move forward with that experience, and without ignoring it, without denying it, but without having to resolve it? And that fits so well with the fundamentals of Gestalt, is just being aware of who you are now. And in that awareness, the change, some of the change happens, and then helping the client, the coaching client, to move forward with those difficult relationships. So that if they're having a painful or difficult experience with their boss, they may identify that as an early relationship reminder of their father that they're having difficulty with. In therapy, of course, we go and deal with the relationship with their father. But in coaching, we say, okay, now you're aware that how can we see the difference between your boss and your father, and your reactions to your boss as coming from that, and how can we find a different way of differentiating and coming into the present and seeing your boss as separate and not as a transferential or projection of your father. So that's the work that we would do in coaching. And sometimes it really isn't possible to do that work because the past is so overwhelming. And then I recommend that the coachee goes for therapy because they can't overcome that. But that's fundamentally the difference, that we're moving forward in coaching and we're trying to heal those elements of the past.
Yeah. So I have a question connecting to here, which is, what do you think Gestalt therapy represents in the world nowadays?
Well, I can say much more about how Gestalt can speak certainly to organizations. Gestalt therapy has evolved and developed, and I have to acknowledge that I'm a little bit out of step with the new developments. I was at the joint EAGT conference in Sicily and just was amazed at the presentations on how Gestalt therapy had progressed. My application is more about how we utilize the body of Gestalt theory and practice in organizations. And in that respect, as I said earlier, helping organizations to be aware of where they are, to connect with each other, to build quality relationships, which I think is the essence of Gestalt. It's about connecting in the moment and being able to share experiences and get the juice out of our relationships. And I think in organizations and in coaching, there is such an emphasis on the striving, the level of exhaustion and stress in constantly moving forward. And we're seeing an awful lot of work being done on well-being, which it's now, that's a much more acceptable term. We can talk about well-being in organizations. We can't really talk about therapy. But I think Gestalt therapy has a huge amount to add in terms of helping executives especially deal with probably a lot of their narcissistic tendencies, because often that's what's got them there. You know, I am the best. I totally believe in myself. Yeah. So high level of hubris in the workplace, which in a sense is almost necessary to progress in a very driven commercial environment.
Yeah, sounds really good. What attracted you toward Gestalt methodology and therapy at the beginning of your professionalism?
Well, I was 20 when I first experienced Gestalt. I was in a personal development group because I worked in a center for alcoholics, and the group was meeting there, and as a staff member I was eligible to join, and I was kind of blown away by the level of openness and honesty and ability to transform problems. Of course, I was working with alcoholics, and I was really absolutely beginner at this, so I hadn't really much of an idea. I mean, I'd been involved in the 12-step program for Alcoholics Anonymous, so I understood some of the basics of that and could see how Gestalt tied in a certain way. And then from that, I had a number of friends who were very involved then in the therapy world and got caught up in starting the first Gestalt training program in Scotland, in the UK. And that was absolutely amazing. I was blown away by our trainer, Isha Bloomberg, who's since deceased, but he was a massive influence. And just watching him create insights for other people in such a short time. I can even picture it now, one of those sessions, and many, many, many subsequent experiences, both for myself and seeing how I could transform and watching other people. And it somehow, I don't know why, I was incredibly fortunate that having met Gestalt at a very early age, it just fitted beautifully with who I was. And I've studied practically nearly all of the humanistic therapies since then in various forms. But I still keep coming back to Gestalt or integrating Gestalt into them. So I think I was just very fortunate at a very early age. I found my vocation.
Yeah.
Even though at the time I didn't know it, I was still all over the place, of course,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a young man. But yeah.
So you almost answered my next question, which was, what kind of change did Gestalt philosophy accumulated in your personal life?
Well, it meant that I met my wife. We met in a Gestalt group. And then that was 40 years ago. So we've had I guess what people might consider to be a successful marriage, at least from the outside. Obviously, like every relationship, goes through tremendous rocky times and difficulties. But I would say that our commitment to the Gestalt perspective of accepting each other, even though in the midst of a row, that's incredibly difficult to do, but that just we had a saying, I'm right and you're right too. So it was incumbent upon each of us to find how the other was right in terms of this argument. And that generally helped, and just letting each other be, accepting our emotions was a key part of it, and working through it. And then each other going to our own different therapy as part of that, having couples therapy. So it kind of permeated our whole lives. And our two girls would say they want nothing to do with Gestalt. But it's interesting, I'm watching how they're bringing up their own children and how they engage in their work. And I can see what we went through is kind of coming out in other ways, but they would never call it Gestalt. That was, no, we don't do that. But we can see it has a wonderful influence. And I now have a grandson who lives now across the road. Both my girls live within a short walk. So that's something I feel very proud of, that both my girls wanted to come back and live close to us. And indeed, my grandson is just across the road, and he's 15 months old. Wow. And I now consider him my Gestalt teacher in terms of being present in the moment, because he and I spend one day a week together where we explore the world totally in the moment, because there's nothing else for him than absolute experience in the moment, and our relationship connected without anything else, without any prejudice, without any projections or reactions. So it's a real delight now to have that, just reconnecting with that very, very simple exercise, because we do those exercises in Gestalt now I'm aware of, and you go around and you have a sensory experience of your world. Well, he and I do that together. He leads me in our sensory experience with whatever it is, whether we're washing up or digging the garden, in the soil, or
So hearing this wonderful story, we can say Gestalt is a fertile field for marriages, no?
Well, it has been for us. Yes, it has been. Yes, very, very fertile. We've yeah, and we go through, layers and layers and layers as we progress. Now, after 40 years, and hopefully maybe another 20.
Yeah. Hopefully, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
A little bit back to fertile void. Do you have any personal experience you had with fertile void in your personal life or professional life?
The way I understand the fertile void, I came across that that phrase or that construct probably about 10 years into my Gestalt practice, and I was absolutely intrigued by it. I was a Quaker at that point. And in Quakerism, they talk about simply being open and present to the Spirit of God. And that essence of sitting in that emptiness, is sitting in that void, but also sitting in a space that we know has the richness of love and divine spirit. So that is the fertile void, the concept of the world being unknown and open and empty, but yet at the same time very full, is something I've been exploring and working with, well, really the last 30 years and getting to know it. And I would say that I can't put one particular incident, but it's constantly in our in my marriage. We are constantly aware of what's next. What are we opening up to? What am I opening up to in my life, in my career? Where am I going to next? And as I said, trusting that if I pay attention to myself and the world around me, I can open up to new experiences and even painful experiences, friends who've died, difficult situations in my business, ways of holding an internal place somewhere that believes that this world will become positive. And there's something very valuable, something very fertile in this painful situation. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that has drawn me into Buddhism as well. So I've kind of transitioned somewhat from Quakerism to Buddhism, which also has this notion of emptiness and equanimity, the peacefulness that we are aiming to be in, and allowing the space for just simply being and being present. So the whole different elements of Buddhism, which I'm finding really useful. I'm finding the structure of Buddhism is giving me a new direction as I step on from being a Quaker.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like this Buddhism and the connecting experiences is your focus in your life nowadays, is it?
Yes. I've been especially focused on a Tantra Buddhist practice in Nepal.
Yes.
And Bhutan, and the wonderful wall hanging is a hand-woven carpet from Bhutan. And Bhutan is a country that's steeped. It's Buddhism is the national religion. In fact, the only religion. I've been deeply impressed by how Bhutan is a country and their whole process of gross national happiness, mm-hmm. which is really all based on Buddhism. The focus on joy and living a compassionate and joyful life, and I've been kind of weaving that into Gestalt because Gestalt has very much the notion of accepting who you are, awareness of who you are. Buddhism has another perspective of striving, actually, a kind of strange effort of focusing on letting go, whereas my experience of Gestalt is simply being and expressing who you are. Their focus is on letting go of certain emotions. So it's kind of working with two different realities and weaving them together.
Mm-hmm.
One of the particular practices that I was noticed, which is considered to be an advanced practice, is using what we would call the empty chair. So if you have a difficult relationship, if you're struggling to understand someone and you're having an internal reaction to them, there is a practice where you in effect put yourself in their shoes. Mm-hmm. You allow yourself to experience their world, and as we know in Gestalt, the two-chair exercise creates then understanding and compassion, which is really the emphasis in Buddhism. How do we find compassion and understanding? So it was lovely to come across that technique, mm-hmm. Which kind of favored very much our Gestalt methodology. So the two I'm finding very complementary, and but still very challenging. The next step in my life.
Yeah, very, very much interesting. Something we use in our professional work, people just use in the everyday life somewhere in the other part of the world, right?
That's right. Yes. Where they haven't heard. I mean, this is, Bhutan is a very much primarily a subsistence agriculture economy, although doing incredibly well. But nevertheless, it's there, and Tibetan Buddhism has all of these practices that Gestalt has. We know that Fritz Perls, we go to a Zen monastery for a number of months.
Yeah.
And the story goes anyway that he was there for a few months and came back and said it was way too slow, that Gestalt was much faster. And just sitting around for 4 months was basically a waste of time. So I haven't really explored the actual similarities with Zen Buddhism, but I know lots of other people have.
I have to tell you a very short story. Once on my Gestalt exam, I sat to my professor, I don't know anything. And he said, listen, a Zen Buddhist sits for 40 years to experience this. So congratulations.
Lovely. Yes, you know nothing. The beginner's mind. Yes. Yeah.
So, John, we are very close to our end of our interview, and I enjoyed every minute with you. I have a last question, which is, if there is any message you would send to the participants of the conference, why do you recommend them to come and join to us?
Well, my experience of Gestalt conferences, it's all about the connection, meeting new people, and people who are committed to being themselves and to sharing their experiences. So it becomes an incredibly enriching time. I'd also encourage participants to come and see themselves as creating the community. Too often in conferences, it's left up to the organizers, and there's criticism that the timing wasn't right, or this wasn't thing, or the food wasn't in the right place at the right time. And we can very quickly get into a sort of customer supplier, it's the conference organizers that haven't got it right. And those will always be the case. But if we come with a desire to see ourselves responsible for creating the community. And when things aren't working well, to pitch in and just help to change them. And I know the EAGT conference and the conference that you're organizing will be really open to people coming up in a really positive and encouraging way, offering suggestions of how things could run more smoothly or slightly differently. So come, really invest yourself, allow it to be emergent. So this notion that there's something incredibly fertile here in this time together, but we don't know what it is. We have it, you have, we have. I'm going to be presenting something, not entirely sure quite what, because it's a year away and I'll be different in 12 months' time. So we will be creating something together. So take responsibility, join in, contribute, share, and it will be an incredibly rich time, because that's what Gestalt is all about.
Yes.
Thank you
very much, John. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity just to share my thoughts and summaries up to this point. And as I say, by the time the conference comes round, I'll be in a different place, and the presentation I was going to give today will be a different one in a year's time. Yeah. Thank you very much, Olivia. And thank you for inviting me to be a keynote presenter.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your presence and availability and the knowledge you shared with us.
Lovely. Thank you.